Okay, we're recording, and I'm with LeAnn. LeAnn, tell everybody where you are in your author journey.
Well, I have how many? Four going on five romance novels that are online already, and got
Nice.
one sci-fi book up there, and the book we're going to be working on is the sequel to
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know what else to
Okay.
say.
Nice. What was the? I'm just going to ask you this for my entertainment. What was the shift from romance to sci-fi?
Actually, it was kind of the other way around. I
Oh,
was
was it?
into sci-fi long before I, for a long time, I was just like, oh, I'm just not interested in that
Okay.
romance stuff. So I'm too good for that.
That's really
And
funny.
and then one of my daughters gave me a book to read by Georgette Heyer, and I read it, and I said, that's pretty good. I bet I
Okay.
could do that.
Nice.
Yeah,
Um, that's awesome. Are you a Trekkie or a Star Wars person, or
Star
neither?
Trek.
Star Trek.
Trek.
I
Yeah,
grew up a
yeah,
Trekkie as well. Yeah,
yeah,
my mom and I used to watch
yeah.
all the old Star Treks together.
You know, I don't mean to step on anybody's toes, but to me, Star Wars is space fantasy.
It is a little bit, yeah. It's
Yeah,
more it's definitely
it,
more like magic fantasy world.
exactly. The
Yeah.
Force is something that's not explained, not even attempted to really be explained by any kind of science
Yeah.
until
I mean
they started talking about the blood stuff. But
they have now. I don't know that it made it
yeah,
better. We should stop. We're gonna get letters.
we're
Anyway,
gonna get in trouble. Yeah,
that's right. But I grew up a Trekkie as well. I'm doing this. I love Star Wars now. Like I've grown to like it as an adult. But
yeah. I
yeah.
enjoyed it. I just don't take it quite as seriously as the Star Trek stuff. What I like about Star Trek is the hopeful future, the positivity. It's not post-apocalyptic,
No, yeah.
or what's the other term they use for, the future's just gone all wrong, Hunger Games
Yeah.
kind of thing. I can't remember the term, but it's 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 a more positive, upbeat future. You still got
Yeah.
drama, but you don't have all that really downer stuff.
It's a very hopeful look at the future. And yeah, I always favorite captain.
Uh, Probably Kirk,
Okay.
even though uh
New
he's a bit of
Kirk
an
or old Kirk?
overactor. But
Old
I'm
Kirk. Okay.
watching some of the old shows, and wasn't just him. I mean, it was over directed. It was
Oh
over. I mean,
yeah.
it was,
Yeah. The movie with the whales is my favorite. Um,
yeah,
Kind of
that's a good one.
overacted. It's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. But I'm a Picard guy. I couldn't. I mean, that part of that's just my generation. I grew up with the next generation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's
And
enough.
I like Janeway too.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to your piece. I'm going to share my screen and we can talk through it.
Okay.
So, do you want to? This is a big cast scene,
Hmm.
and it has some issues. Mainly that you lose half the cast on page 8. Do you want to go big issues to small issues, or do you want to go through kind of note by note type thing?
I usually like going big to small, but
Okay.
I will also defer to you if you think
No, yeah, let's go big to
one
small.
way will work better than the other.
So, what's going really, really well in the piece, what you're doing really well, is you are writing. You're using your vocalizations of characters to really drive the intensity of the action scene. So I'm going to blow this up a little because that's kind of small. Um, so let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Uh, let's get down to where Sullivan and Trell are running away from people. Yeah, so here's another one that's really great. Got it. He sounded relieved. He skipped toward her fast enough to catch up to her. Three ant creatures appeared on the corner, heading straight toward him. She lifted her pistol and shot, hitting the first one in the thorax. It bounced up to the admin, then crumpled sideways. The other ant clambered over it. She blasted its head. The third lowered its head and pushed forward. She pulled the trigger but missed. Trell, great utterance, like vocalization. He spun around, but the ant had reached his feet and lunged into his leg, wrapping the sharp mandibles around his calves. Stars and moons, he shouted. Get off, get it off, get it off. She hurried over. So you can see how, like, you could have written all of that without their vocalizations. But adding their vocalizations in has really enhanced the emotional power of the moment. And I think that's something as an author, especially sci-fi, fantasy, action writers, we tend to lose when we get into a fight scene or in an action scene. Everybody goes silent, and what happens when you do that is you lose the emotional resonance of the moment. So you've done a really great job of keeping that in here, all the way through, and the piece has great emotional flow. It builds really well emotionally. There's some really good climaxes. It's a nice. So before we get into losing voices, I wanted to compliment you on, like, that's really great.
Thank you.
Was that intentional? Did you write this dialogue first? Like, what did you do to make sure you were incorporating their voices?
This was before I started doing dialogue first writing, which is the
Okay.
way I'm writing now. And I've been writing for a long time. And I think I just kind of did it instinctively, and I can
Yeah.
kind of hear what they're saying.
Nice. Yeah, it's great. It's definitely cinematic in its flow, which I think is excellent. Okay, let's talk about you losing characters though. So there's 7 characters in this piece.
Or 6.
7 or 6? 1,
6.
2, 3,
There's the 4 humans and 2 aliens.
4, 5. I have 7. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'm counting one twice. This isn't important. We've got
Sullivan, Davis, Ramirez, and Hiranaka.
yeah, Trell and Usher. Okay, yeah, you're right. There's 6. I mean,
But
okay,
it's a big scene, and
big
when I
scene.
went through it after all of this stuff that I learned from you, and I was like, this 6 people, I really need to put some of them into a chorus or something. I don't know how, because they all have these things that they're saying, but they're not
Yeah,
all contributing equally, which is of course to be expected.
and that's okay. They shouldn't all contribute equally.
Right.
If they're all contributing equally, it starts to feel crowded and like too much is going on. We do lose some of them. So before we get into like what's happening and how we can fix it, do you lay out who is in the spaceship in the chapter before this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in the chapter before is when they're all getting on the spaceship and they're given their hand weapons and things like that. So
okay.
Yeah.
I was at a little disadvantage because I was like discovering characters as I went. I was like, oh, this character's here too. But I figured that this scene picks up in the middle of a scene. So this chapter picks up in the middle of a scene. So,
and I could have set the scene for you in an email, but I just didn't think to do that.
You did. You told me in the email there's 6 characters in this scene, and so I knew going in that there was a big chorus. So what I've done is I've highlighted everybody's names. So this is just a cheap trick to track your characters. If you feel like, am I losing people? What I'll do is I'll just go to, and this works in both Word and Google Docs. I just go to find and I'll put in a character's name, and then it'll show me all of the instances of that character, and then I'll just go through every instance and highlight that character in a color. This took me, with your 6 characters, 13 pages, this took me like 20 minutes. It's not a big give. What it allows us to do is scroll through the pages and be like, okay, where are characters fading out? Where am I losing them? Where do I need to bring them back in? And you're right, with 6 characters, you could be grouping them into like the rest of the crew um moments. So first, let's just take a moment and ask, like, are you losing too many? Now, I haven't highlighted Sullivan and Trell because they're on every page.
Okay.
So I don't
That
need to
makes
worry
sense.
about them. Yeah, they're on
Yeah.
every single page. I don't need to worry about Sullivan and Trell. And highlighting them just like makes it noisy. So I've left them out. I'm just looking at the characters that
Yeah.
might be missing.
Okay.
So
That's good.
Hirokana,
Yeah.
she has a moment here, a moment here, a moment here, where they're like in the dialogue, a moment here. So far we're running about every page with Hirokana. Um, we then lose Hirokana until the bottom of 5. The question is, like, is that okay? There's no rule here about like how often does somebody need to be mentioned? How often does somebody need to appear? I would say I didn't lose for Hirokana when I was and so a lot of this becomes like, how do you feel about it when you're reading it? When I was reading, I didn't feel like I had lost track of Hirokana yet. I knew they were still there. So when they spoke, I wasn't surprised. I was like, oh yeah, they haven't gone anywhere. I know they're there. So I'm okay with Hirokana like not appearing until the bottom of 5 again, especially since we got them so much up top. When we get Hirokana again here on 6, again, you're keeping them engaged. It's great. But here at this point, we lose Hirokana completely. Oh no, I'm sorry. We have one more on 8. And then after 8, we lose Hirokana completely.
Yeah.
Now, you at 8, you run the cast down to just Sullivan and Trell.
Right. I was going to say at that
Yeah.
point, they've separated into 2 groups, and we followed Sullivan and Trell, and so the only thing we're getting from the other people is occasional radio communication for them to just update what's
Yeah.
going on.
And I think what I'm missing here in that we can talk about this moment now. You talk about them separating, right? Like Sullivan followed him, gasped for ventily brightness. Trell was almost 10 feet, dodging the equipment hall blaster. She hurried to catch up, shuttle away. Hirokana said to the radio, oh, damn. Someone else said it sounded like Davis. So here we're talking about them like separating and leaving. What I wanted was when we finally lose communication with them, which happens about here, I need a paragraph or a couple sentences that indicates the crew's broken off
Yeah.
and we're not going to
Yeah,
hear from them anymore.
yeah, I'm noticing that. I had her give the instructions, you go that way, we're going this way, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't actually have them
Yeah, you don't
on
tell
the
me.
page. They didn't execute that.
Yeah,
What
I
was
mean,
that?
it's
Yeah,
implied because they're talking about going that way, but we
right,
don't actually see them run in that direction. And then
right,
at some point in here in page 8, where because at the right here at the middle of page 9, now we're all Sullivan and Trell in the enemy ship,
right.
right? So somewhere in here, I need you to note that she's no longer talking to the rest of the crew. Sometimes, a lot of times, sci-fi will do this with like, take a moment for Sullivan to try to reach out and like comms are scrambled, right? Like a lot of times when you see sci-fi authors being like, the comms are scrambled, we can't get back to the ship. It's actually just a dumb technique to isolate 2 characters. Does that make sense? Like
Yep.
I was just watching the newest Ahsoka episode and their comms go down. And I'm like, okay, so we're isolated. Like that's what we're doing here. Like we're gonna isolate them. and magically, as soon as the major conflict is over, comms are restored, right? Like it's that kind of like, oh, look at that, here it comes back. So you could do that here. You could have Sullivan mention that like she can't reach the shuttle. Or you could have Sullivan just like give them a line in which she says something like, you know, stay on the line for when I call back to you. But we need to wrap up that other crew. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think having her see them, head in the other direction, disappear behind some stuff,
That would do it.
you know, that will work. And then she can occasionally maybe wonder, I wonder how the other guys are doing. She'll see flashes of light, but that's all she can see.
Well, once she's in the ship, I would have her.
No, once she's in the ship, no, yeah,
Yeah.
she's not going to see anything.
Yeah. And
Right.
I really just need one moment where she sees them vanish. And then we, as the reader, can stop thinking about them until they come back. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. They do come back, right? You don't kill all these people in this chapter.
Nope. Nope.
Okay. Nope, they don't come back, or nope, you don't kill them.
No, I don't kill. One gets injured, but
Okay.
they...
So knowing that here we're bringing them, we're cutting ties with them. And I'm just going to go ahead and mark this with a color so we can see it clearly. Knowing that here we're marking ties. What color have I used? I don't think I used gray. Knowing that around here we're cutting ties with them. Now we have kind of like a baseline to be like, okay, how's the bigger cast doing outside of all of this? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we did
We looked at
Hironaka. The next one I think is Davis who appears. So no, I'm sorry, it's Ramirez. So we get Ramirez here. Dios. Ramirez said the shuttle doesn't have weapons, does it? And then he comes back here. Again, great other entrance. We've got him solidly on the first 2 pages. We lose him for 3. We lose him for 4. We lose him for 5. He doesn't come back till 6. Now, he was one of the characters when I was reading, my gut was like, man, he really disappears. Right? And he comes back again in 8. And then again in 9. Right before they leave. So there's just a block in here for 3 pages where I'm like, the pace of this, I might want to see him once more in here. So maybe somewhere on page 2, you very much isolate Trell and Sullivan on page 2. When we start here, it's just Trell and Sullivan until Davis enters again here. So something you might do in here is might reference the rest of the crew. And that reminds us that everybody is there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because the reason we've got Sullivan and Trell here is because they're sitting in the 2 seats in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Everybody else is behind them. So she's not necessarily even going to be aware of them unless somebody makes a comment or
and you could
breathes on over her shoulder.
You could throw a Ramirez comment in here. I have a feeling though we're going to want to bring out other people. Or like here would be a good place to put a Ramirez comment. So because we can do Opash next. I think this is the first Opash start. Yeah, so the first time we hear Opash, we don't hear Opash until page 4. Yeah. And then we get Opash on 5, we get Opash on 6, Opash is on 7, but then that's the Opash disappears. We need first off, we need Opash a little bit earlier. I try to get Opash into page 1 or page 2, just give them something to say. Does that make sense? Again, emotional.
I think maybe even just some sort of a movement, a body language kind of thing.
Moving around, by just know that they are in the room. Does that make sense? And this is where you can start grouping people. Like, okay, I'm losing We just did Ramirez. I'm losing Ramirez after 2. I don't have anybody on 3. 4 and 5 are a little, sparse. This is where you could be like, Sullivan, Hurd, Ramirez, and Opash, and Sullivan heard the rest of the crew behind her doing blah blah blah,
Yeah.
and it reminded her of blank, right? Like that's all you need in here to remind us that, like, yeah, the crew is here and they're behind her where we can't see them.
Yeah.
Opash is entering utterance to this scene. This is suicide, Opash said, or we need to get away from them. Another weapon left the shields. No way she could dodge it, but she didn't seem to do any damage. This is a huge emotional, like, pop that nobody responds to. So another way to work some characters in here would have Ramirez respond, right? Nobody corrects Opash. Nobody agrees with Opash. Opash is just allowed to scream, and then everybody else is just like, "Oh, ignore Opash. Just keep focused head down." So it works really well because it creates this emotional moment, but we need somebody to respond to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here's a moment where you could pull in Ramirez or Davis in a second that we're going to talk about. You get into this thing here where she and Sullivan are talking about the Han Solo maneuver,
Mm-hmm.
where she says, "I'm going to do a Han Solo maneuver." This is another place where you could have somebody behind her comment, maybe even 2 people comment. One person be like, that's a movie, right? And somebody else be like, let her do what she's going to do, right? Like,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
but letting them comment on what's happening is another place you can pull in these other voices. Might be a good place for Opash and Ramirez. Something I do with children's book authors, but it also works well for action scenes, is you give each character a single emotional response. So when you're in a heightened, so like a lot of times with children's books, you'll have like a team of characters, and each character like represents something. Like this character is always worried, and this character is always brainy, and this character is always like too
They're
courageous.
Smurfs. They're
Yeah, they're
Smurfs.
Smurfs, they're backyardigans, right?
Yep.
Like they're
Yep.
little Einsteins. Like each character has a single personality note.
Right.
You can do that some in action scenes. You can get away with it. You can't do it for a whole adult book because you get into the C3PO problem where people are like, I hate this character. Or the Jar Jar Binks problem where they're like, okay, this is just dumb. It starts to feel like kids' literature.
Well, yeah, you don't want to Smurf the whole thing, but I can see how
Yeah,
in an action scene that could kind of, I don't know, simplify things.
it gives you an excuse to bring in voices. Is the only reason I use it for. So like Opash screams here, this is suicide. Who in the secondary cast is most level-headed at this moment?
Davis.
Davis. Who would be like angry at Opash screaming this? Like who would be annoyed by this?
Probably Ramirez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is suicide, Opash shouted. We need to get away from here. Not helping, Ramirez said.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody focus on their jobs, Davis shouted. Another
Yeah.
weapon left from the ship this wide beam. Do you see like how I'm just
Yeah.
giving them single notes? And that's
Yeah.
where you can start working patterns in, right? So it has to be coming from the Species X ship, Opash said. Enough to trigger a bomb? Shit, Davis said, we got less than 15 minutes. So I might take Opash's thing here that she says, up the emotional energy to it. Oh my God, it has to be coming from the Species X ship.
Yeah.
Right? Ramirez, get yourself together. Enough to trigger a bomb? Sullivan asked. Shit, Davis says, we got less than 15 minutes. You can see how those are all the same emotional notes, but they're allowing you to bring these other characters into that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can't do that with Sullivan and Trell. They have to have the more nuanced emotional responses you're giving them, but these chorus members, they don't need a nuanced emotional response here. They can just be like color commentary around your lead POV,
Yeah.
right?
I like that. Yeah.
Especially since you've got your lead POV, you've got a single POV book. Mostly, you've got a couple scenes that are out of Sullivan's POV, but you mostly have a single POV book. We don't need a nuanced emotional response from Opash here. Opash just represents this, one note in this. So, like
Yeah.
here, I'd pull it back again. Opash opened the compartment to the wall and pulled out the weapons, handing them to each crew member. Give Opash an utterance. Opash opened up the compartment of the wall and pulled out the weapons, handing them to each crew members. These are never going to be enough. This isn't enough, right? Like, give her that like worried panic. Opash is she, right? Am I remembering that right? Yeah. Give her that panic, and then Ramirez grabbed a gun from her. Just give it to me,
Yeah.
right? So we're gonna shoot from here. Hironaka said. But you can see, like, I'm just adding a line of
Yeah. Yeah.
dialogue
Yeah.
that pulls
Yeah.
Ramirez back into this piece. Again, here, spirits, Opash complained, they have 6 legs. This is right on brand for this character.
Yep.
6 legs, Opash said.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you need to bring those other 2 characters in here to respond to her, and now you have a fuller, complete scene. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So Hironaka's fine. Ramirez, we're going to pull back by responding to Opash. And then we're going to do the same thing with Davis. And you can see, again, Davis. Oh, sorry. Before we end with Opash, I need you to give Opash something to say or do on that first page. Did we already say that? We talked about
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
that. Okay. Sorry, I got lost in where we were.
We didn't come up with anything, but I can do that.
Yeah, and now that you know that, like, okay, we're going to give her a single emotional note, maybe start to build to it here, right? Like, instead of the like exclaimed terror that she expresses later, maybe just give her some anxiety here.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, like, here would be a good
Yeah.
place
I
for
mean,
it.
she's already got to be pretty damn scared because they know who's coming after them.
Yeah, right. Like, so,
So yeah.
yeah. So, like, Trell made a laughing sound. Maybe he flicked his hands over the controls. Sullivan lifted your feet from floor. Okay, that was all the gravity we have, but the difference in speed, not much at all. Not going to be enough, Hironaka said. Ideas, Sullivan said, but no one answered. We're going to die, Ramirez mumbled. So, like, right here, in between not going to be enough, Hironaka said, and ideas, Sullivan said, that's a great place for an Opash exclamation, right? Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Right? Like, giving her that, like,
Yeah.
Sullivan could tell Opash was beginning to panic, right? Like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
starting to build that character up. You don't even need to change anything else about what's happening. You can just kind of surgically insert Opash in there, and it still raises the stakes in the scene. Yeah. I think Davis, like Hironaka, is good. You've got Davis on page 1. Oh no, I'm sorry. They disappear for 5 pages. Here they are
Yeah.
again on page 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, coming back up here with Opash, working in Davis and Ramirez is going to fix that problem, right?
Yep.
And then, so in summary, we want to get into a pattern where we let Opash, Davis, and Ramirez all be single note characters, right? Opash is panicked, Ramirez is annoyed, Davis pulls them back to their jobs. So, and you want them kind of often speaking in that order. Opash yells, Ramirez mumbles, Davis says blank. And if you do that
Yeah.
2 times in here, you've filled your cast out. Does that make sense? And then at the end, around page 8, where we marked that gray, we need a clear disappearance of the shuttle so that we don't have to worry about them anymore. They're gone, right?
Right. Yeah.
You watch the shuttle turn around the corner of the ship, still being chased by the exoskeletons. She hoped they'd be okay, but she couldn't worry about that right now. Sullivan turned to make sure Terrell was still behind her, right? Like we need that kind of
Yep.
like
Yep.
sentence
Yep.
that wraps them up. How does that feel in fixing your cast?
I think that's good. Yeah, just giving them each kind of that one note thing is going to be what I need to just throw a couple of more lines in there, and
Yeah, and it's
not like
you're
it's just throwing lines in there, but yeah.
no, that is what you're doing. You're just surgically inserting lines to be like, okay, I need to make sure everybody here is following the cast. And I
Yeah.
find this problem occurs most in two types of scenes. It's in action scenes and in comedy scenes. A lot of times in comedy scenes, two characters will start riffing with each other and we lose the rest of the cast.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what's happening here too. You have two characters riffing with each other, Sullivan and Trail, and you're losing the rest of the cast. So we just need to pull them in a way that doesn't add more plot, right? You don't want to add more plot points because then Sullivan has to respond, Trail has to respond, and then you start screwing with the emotional intensity you built, right? Like you already have a tight emotional flow. You don't want to mess with that. But adding in just these emotional notes where these characters are literally not adding any content, they're just expressing emotionality, keeps us engaged in that big cast scene, and it builds that energy. It gives you a couple more back and forths. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, if you wanted to add some other stuff in, I've marked in here a couple places where you come to an end of a segment. So by end of a segment, I mean the conversation. Did I just mark one? I thought I marked at least three. Here's another one.
Another one, yeah.
The conversation kind of comes to a beat, or the scene kind of comes to a pause beat. And I want you to add a little. Here's another moment that's kind of an end of the segment. There needs to be one of two things happening. Either I need more Sullivan reflection, and or you can drop another line here from somebody else. And actually, it's not one of two things. One or two things need to happen. So you can drop another line here, but I absolutely need more Sullivan reflection. So let's look at like why I want more Sullivan reflection at these points, so you can start to get a feel for kind of like for why that's happened. So Hironaka made a move. Sorry, let me back up a little bit more. They're coming fast, Hironaka said. I give them 5 minutes. Change course and see if they compensate. That's Sullivan. Hironaka made a move. A moment later, they had their answer. They're definitely pursuing us. Dios, Ramirez said, this shuttle doesn't have weapons, does it? So Ramirez is changing the topic here, right? Yeah. Hironaka says they're definitely pursuing us, saying like we are being chased. Ramirez is now like, how are we going to deal with the chase? This is where I need a moment of reflection from Sullivan about the fact that they're being chased. Does that make sense? It brings one section to a close before you open up into the next section, and it gives us an emotional breath to ponder the intensity of the moment. It doesn't need to be a big paragraph. I don't need more than like a sentence and a half. So something like Hironaka made a move. A moment later, they had their answer. They're definitely pursuing us, right? Sullivan shook her head. This was the last thing they needed. If she was going to be chased, she wished it was in a. She wished it was in. She wished it wasn't in this clunker, right? Diaz Ramirez says, "Does this shuttle even have weapons? Does this shuttle doesn't even have weapons? Does it?" So you can see how like me just adding that like sentence and a half gives the reader a moment to kind of take in what's happening in the scene change. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the kind of like the segment change, that micro scene. So here's the next one comes. You do it well up here, by the way. I could look through and find where you do like, well, here's it. We'll look at the one that was missing that I want another one at. Yeah, Sullivan said, but we can't stay here forever. And I doubt the Species X is going to oblige us with the second half of Mr. Solo's trick. So we've got to come up with something else. I have no idea what you're talking about, Trill said. I'll show you the movie someday. She leaned back in her chair. It almost didn't seem real that they were still alive. That's a great reflection. But it's not how are they going to get away? So you're transitioning really quickly. You drop this heavy thing. It almost doesn't seem real that they were alive. But how are they going to get away? Like you're moving too quickly off that big emotional beat. So give me another sentence there. You can think about heavy emotional moments and these transitions in your scene. This moment, it's a rare thing in writing, but this does just become about space taken up on the page. The longer you make the reader deal with it, the more the reader's going to feel that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I remember you talking about letting the reader sit in the emotion.
Yeah, let them sit. And this is a big emotion, right? Like she's had this big momentary victory that you're about to turn into chaos. Let her sit there for a moment and enjoy the victory. They do it in the scene you're referencing where Han Solo parks his ship on another ship. They actually, they actually do it there. He parks the ship there, and then they all sit in silence. And Lucas makes us watch them sit in silence for a moment as they
Leia
figure
says,
out.
you have your moments.
Yeah. So this is like one of those moments where we need to sit in silence, right? But the only way to make a reader sit in silence is to add prose to the page, add that exposition of her thoughts and her reflection. That's the way you make the reader sit in silence. It's a weird, like, we really see this in screenplays in that, like, when you're writing a screenplay, every page equals a certain amount of time. It's actually the same for a novel, but it's not minute to minute. It's like every page, the longer you spend on a specific emotional moment, the bigger that moment becomes for you. Right? Like, so if you're the reverse of this is like, if a book feels weighty, like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever to get through, it's because you're spending too much time on moments that you shouldn't, right? Like, so it's a give and take. Here's another one. I want you to pause here to reflect and share her feelings because it'll make the fear pop in the next line. So Hiranaga says, can we take off again? Will that turn the bomb off? Doubt it, Ramirez says. I don't think it was a possibility they considered. I agree, Sullivan said, but if we leave the shuttle, where the hell do we go? Inside the ship? Trell jumped to his feet. Something moved out there. Right? Like, this is a big, like, scary moment. Like, this is the monster in the window moment, right? Like, oh crap, there's something out there, right? Pause here for a second and have Sullivan reflect on, like, this was a problem they couldn't solve. What was she going to do? They couldn't all get out of the ship. They couldn't all do this thing. They could, right? Like, let her weigh some options here and then interrupt her processing with Trell jumped to his feet, something moved out there. You can see by, like, slowing down her processing actually makes Trell's line feel bigger. Does that make sense?
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this is where you need Opash, right? Like, Trell jumped to his feet. Something moved out there. Oh my, I don't know what Opash would say because she's an alien. Oh my God, where? You saw something out there? Right? Like, that's where you need to bring in her, like, panicked attitude. And then you've already got Ramirez. There's no one out there. Calm down, right? Like, he's already there. So you've got that, like,
and it's actually better for him to have that response to Opash because he's very anti-woman.
Yeah,
so
and he's already
anything that a woman does,
that's nice.
He's gonna forgive Trell. He's not gonna forgive.
He's not gonna forgive. Well, yeah, I like that a lot. Not that he's anti-woman, but I like that the character voice aligns that.
It just fits better if he's responding to her panic.
Yeah. So I would drop a line in there, and again, we're just taking up space on the page to make the reader sit in this moment. um, we talked about this one, how you need to sit there. I think that was the last one where I was like, I need a reflection from her. But let me scan it real quick. Because once you get with, oh, here's one I added for you. This is a sentence just to like make things slow down, right? Um, I need you, Trell. If you freeze, we'll both end up dead in a few minutes. I know. If you work with me, we can survive. Understand? How? How is that possible? No time to explain. Just get me the engineer. Right? She's transitioning here too quickly. How? How is that possible? If she paused to tell him what she was planning, they'd be swarmed. No time to explain. So you can see by like adding that inner thought for her, if they pause that third person close
Yeah.
inner thought, if she paused to tell them what she was planning, they'd be swarmed, brings more weight to the no time to explain. Right? Like and like
Yeah.
adds that
Yeah.
urgency.
I sometimes when I'm doing the when I'm doing the inner thoughts, I'll be concerned that I'm really kind of just saying over repeating what then gets said out loud.
Yeah,
I don't want it to be just a
sometimes that's okay. I
yeah,
prefer the inner thought to bring some kind of elucidation to what's being said out loud. Like, sometimes it's okay if you're just trying to sit in an emotion. But like she says no time to explain. I'm trying to give it inner thought that says why there's no time to explain.
yeah, yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
And that's again, it takes us a little bit closer to her character. It pulls us into her a little bit more. There's a lot of different things you could do here, though. Like I did this one because I know that you have Sullivan being this like in action moments because you and I have done scenes in this book before. In action moments, she's like business oriented and clever and like
Yeah.
on point.
Yeah,
If you had a
she gets into the zone. She
yeah, she's in the
all
zone.
of that the panic stuff is not there. She's just focused.
Yeah, that's why I modulate. That's why I use this inner voice for her about what she's doing as her inner thought. If she were a character that was more gruff, if she were more a Ramirez character, the inner thought I'd have here is like, I wish he could just pull his shit together. No time to explain, just get me the engineering. Right? Like
Right.
again,
Yeah.
it's expressing what's going on inside the character to give the reader that impact into the character. Or if she were more like well, if she were more like Opash, she wouldn't be saying get me the engineering. If she were less emotional and more um directly kind of to the point, like the one that starts with an H. I can never remember how to pronounce it.
Kuronaka.
Hiranaka. I might have like how is that possible? Right? Hiranaka ran through all the probabilities in her head, not even knowing where to begin to explain to Trell what the next steps were. No time to
Yeah.
explain, just give me the engineering. Right? Like
Yeah.
so you can see how like adding that line, it's not just about adding an inner thought, it's about adding an inner thought that gets us a little deeper into the character's voice and into what's happening in the characters. Right.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And this is a big part of kind of like where another character voice plays out in vocalizations. And with a lot of people, I spend a lot of time talking about like, hey, getting your character voice right. But this is also part of that character voice is the like what they're doing internally,
Mm.
and thinking about internally. Uh, I think that was it. Oh, I could use another short utterance here. This is less about um, inner thought, and it's just about getting his emotional response. So Strel jumped forward, blasting the ants in front of her, then spinning around and picking off a few from behind and back to the front. He pushed against a pile of dead ants directly between them and the door. She felled a couple of ants moving towards Trell, then spun around and dropped a few more in the hallway. Trell opened up the door and slipped through. Right, like we could somewhere in these three lines we could use Trell saying something.
Okay.
And it just needs to be raw emotion, right? Like this
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah, that's good.
working.
I'm glad you said that because I wasn't sure what you meant by another utterance here.
Yeah, I need another, like
Yeah,
another. I just need him to say
yeah,
something. Or if you want it to be encouraging, put it in Sullivan's mouth and have her be
right.
like, don't give up, like, or like just keep going, or like get them off that door, right? Like, some kind of encouraging order that tells him like keep moving. If you want it to be in Trell, because he's more the kind of emotional downer here who keeps falling apart, then you want it to be something like, there's too many of them, right? Like, and then you're gonna have her be like, just keep shooting. Like it's that, like, but we just need that, like, a small back and forth between them to make us sit in the emotional
Yeah,
moment of them. Right now, this part reads very, these 4 paragraphs read very clinical, right? He shouted until we get to it's all clear. He shouted. That's when we get the kind of celebration. But these right on in here, I guess it's just three moments
yeah,
until we
yeah,
shoot. But these 3 moments are reading very clinical. They're both like disciplined and head down, and I don't know that that's the emotional tone you
yeah.
want in this moment.
Well, that's her kind of emotional tone, but not his.
Not
So
his, yeah. So
yeah,
getting that like yell in there of his keeps that emotional energy up. How do you feel? Am I making sense?
yeah,
Okay.
either that or she can actually, I mean, since he has done some things, he's pushed the ants away and stuff. I mean, she might even give him some encouragement.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. She
Um,
might like, yeah, push him,
yeah,
tell him he's doing a good job, tell him, like that's
you
it,
did
keep
it,
going.
just a
Yeah.
couple more
Yeah.
feet. We'll be in
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
um that would work too, and that kind of bends to that positive. Again, it depends on like how you want it to bend. Do you want it to bend in a more excited emotion or in a more kind of heavy emotion?
yeah,
um I think those were all my notes. Again, the piece is so strong. um I don't think I had a lot more to say. Anything else you wanted to talk about?
no, you really hit my concern because I knew I had a problem with the big cast. And
Yeah, but no, you've done really well with it. Oh, here's another place. I found another one. This is another place I want more
yeah,
emotional
yeah,
support. Sullivan followed him, then gasped as the immensity of the blackness surrounded her. That's a great line about space and what it means, but you jump off of it so fast, right?
yeah,
Sullivan followed him and then gasped with the immensity of the blackness surrounded her. Trell was almost 10 feet ahead, dodging equipment holes and whatever. Like you're right back into the moment. So, like, giving me a
yeah,
couple more. um Sullivan followed him and then gasped at the immensity of the immensity of the blackness surrounded her. She felt like it might swallow her whole. Her feet wanted to stand, frozen to the ship, not moving into the void. Um, Trell was almost 15 ahead of her. She hurried to catch up, right? Like giving me that, like, give me a moment here where she feels kind of swallowed by that. Most of the reason I want you to stop here is because that line is so great, right? Then gasps the immensity of the blackness surrounded her. It's a very strongly written description, and it's like you give me that emotional description. As a reader, I'm likely to miss it if you don't sit in it a little bit. Um, does that make sense?
yep. Thank you.
Here's a here's another place where you're nailing the emotional utterance. Now that I'm just like actually reading my notes instead of going off the top of my head. Um, you know, they don't have better technology, Trell said. Nope. Now where's engineering? Trell looked around. His chest rose and fell like he had just run 2 miles and kept blinking. I think through the airlock, he said, pointing to another spot 700 feet away. They're getting closer, Yarnaka said. Davis, take Ramirez Opash and draw their attention away from Trell and me, Sullivan said. Last one out, turn on the shuttle and set its course away from the ship. She pointed to the door. Let's go. So this is a great, like, they're getting closer. Such a great utterance to include because it keeps that external clock running that you really need in these action scenes. You need that like clock ticking of things closing in an action scene.
Mhm.
And you do a great job there of keeping that like clock moving by using Hironaka's voice to keep that going, um, which was great. I think that was all I had. Yeah, we talked about this, right? She had heard about this state, but it was the first time this had ever happened to her.
No, actually, we hadn't
Okay, let's cover this one.
talked about it. Yeah.
Sorry, I got all out of order, LeAnn. I'm sorry. I'm all discombobulated. I got so into the cast, I
You're
got
fine.
lost.
We hit the high points. Now we're
Yeah,
getting
now we're going into the
the
details. Yeah, and
lesser.
I keep getting lost in your piece. I'm like, surely that's all I had to say. So someone in the back screamed a high pitched terror, and then I want you to put these two lines together just because I thought they went better together. I don't really have a reason for it. But Sullivan realized her own paralyzing fear was gone, replaced by a robotic calm and an almost out of body experience. She had heard about this state, but it was the first time it had ever happened to her. A second weapon pod glowed on the enemy ship. Can you feel when I read that how quick that transition is off that emotional moment?
Mhm. Yeah.
You can, as I read it, you can feel me just like naturally slowing down as I read it. She had
Yeah.
heard about this emotional state, but it was the first time it had ever happened to her. Does she like it? Does she not like it? Is it is this good? Is this worrisome for her? Right? She had heard about this emotional state, but it was the first time it's ever happened to her. It felt weird. She wondered if like it felt like she should be more engaged in the moment, but there's nothing she could do about it now. Right? Like but it was the first time it
Yeah.
ever happened to her.
Yeah. To me, what she's feeling is, I mean, it's calm, a robotic calm, and that she knows she's clear-headed. She can think through
Yeah.
problems. She's going to be able to. So that's where she is in her head, is like, okay,
Yeah. So
this
this
is
is
exactly where I need to be
yeah, this is a great
because I'm in
moment.
command. I got to solve this problem.
Yeah, this is a great moment where you can do some foreshadowing. As a lot of times authors do this at this kind of moment where a character is experiencing affirmative change, right? A character is experiencing affirmative growth. It's a great place to pause and give some foreshadowing as to like what this. So she heard about this state. It was the first time it had ever happened to her. In the future, long from this moment, when she was speaking to rooms of cadets, she described this second as the second when she knew she was a good commander, right? Like, and just like hit that emotional beat there. But this is one of those places where, like, when your character feels that moment of emotional confidence or feels that moment of growth, like I am the one who can accomplish this mission, it's a nice moment for foreshadowing where you can be like, in the future when she told the story of, the day that they defeated the, species X, she would point to this moment as the moment when she unexpectedly understood everything was going to be okay. And then you can move into the rest of the piece. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And it that kind of foreshadowing drops a huge amount of emotional weight on the change of the character, and allows you to say, if you wanted an example of somebody who does this, who like I feel like their whole book is just leading to these moments and then giving you foreshadowing. Um, Friedrich Bachman, this is his big tool.
This
He'll
is the
be
Bear
like,
Town guy. Yeah.
yeah, Beartown, like, yeah, I know, like this was the, as Benji's fist connected with the the member from Head, he knew he'd always be a fighter, but he'd likely never play hockey. Right? Like it's that he does that kind of crap all the time. And you're just like, oh,
Mhm.
this is a big moment for Benji. Like, so leaning into this character change It doesn't just give us a special moment here, it gives us a special moment with Sullivan, where we now feel like we're on this journey of growth with her, which is what we're looking for, right? Like we're looking for that moment of growth and power. And it feels a little cheesy, but your reader will love it. Your reader will soak it up. They'll just eat it up. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You can only do it like once or twice in a book. You can't do it, or you get like once or twice to do that in a book. But you do it in these moments where they have a moment of reflection of like, wow, I've changed, or like, wow, I'm experiencing the positive change I need to see to overcome what's happening in the story. That's where you nail that moment down. Is that how you would describe this moment? Is this a moment of growth for her?
Yeah, it's a moment of her gaining a little bit more confidence. She
Yeah.
has had confidence, but not really in a combat situation.
Yeah.
And
It's a self-realization moment.
yeah, this is her. I can do this even in combat.
Yeah. Great moment for foreshadowing. To be like,
Yeah, in the military, we were always talking about, well, I think I would be brave, if people started shooting at me, and the response is nobody ever knows. The person you think would be the bravest will
yeah.
probably fall apart.
Yeah.
And the one that you thought was, the wimp goes out there and does the Audie Murphy.
Yeah.
So that's the moment when she knows I've got what it takes.
Yeah. Give me some for it. Tell me how who she's going to become. Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000 battles later, when this feeling was commonplace to her, she would still remember this moment as being the moment where she knew she had the right stuff, right? Like that kind of like, however you want to nail down this moment of like, hey, reader, this is a big deal. Hit it a little harder. Yeah. So here, I can't believe we're moving backwards. Thank you for tolerating my nonsense this time. Terrell stared at Hironaka. I don't understand. He said, "You're a trained pilot. You know how to do this. She's not." He pointed to Sullivan. Why did you give her your seat? So this is a little. We're already on the nose. He's saying exactly what he thinks, right? As a reader, I can tolerate a little bit of that, but too much of it, and I start to go like, all right, this is just crappy dialogue. So he's doing a little bit of it here, and that is all I'm going to give you. I'm not giving you any more. He's not allowed to say exactly what he thinks, at least for another 2 pages. It was an order. Trell looked at Sullivan. What are you doing? Right? Like, it's too direct. It's too clear a question.
Yeah.
You might as well write here, please explain to the reader what you're doing, right? Like, so let's give it a little nuance and give me some words like, this is highly irregular, or like, this is not how I expect a commander to operate, or like,
I will reword it, but because this is highly irregular, doesn't sound like trouble, but
it's not in his voice.
I can see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can come up with some other comment for him to make.
Yeah. He just needs to say it in a way that isn't asking the direct question.
Yeah.
Right. He can even look at her and be like, pilots should fly planes. Right. Like he can just say like something that like it gets across this intention of what are you doing without asking what are you doing.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to change her response, right? Like Trell looked at Sullivan. The pilot should be flying the plane. This isn't a dogfight. Techniques used by pilots don't apply, right? Like, so her response is great. You just need to change how he's asking the question. I end up doing this too when I write. I'll have a character who's literally just like giving me a setup so I can tell the audience something, and it always gets me into trouble. So yeah. Here's another place I want more ideas. Sullivan said, but nobody answered. We're going to die, Ramirez mumbled. We said here about like putting some Okash in. Her body felt jittery, like she was shivering, and every layer of her skin vibrated at a slightly different frequency. Are you sure it's not a Maryland ship? She said. She's having this big emotional reaction, but we don't know why. We don't know if she's mad, right? We don't know if she's nervous that she's not going to be able to pull this off. I would say, reading down where you take her, that you need to make her nervous that she's not going to pull this off.
Yeah, right. That is supposed to be nervous, so I just need clearer about that.
Yeah, whenever you want to express a character's emotional moment, you've got three tools. You've got their vocalization, you've got their body language, and then you've got their inner thought explain where the POV character is telling you what's going on. Or in third person, your vehicle character, the one that you're moving through the story with, is you give us kind of why.
Yeah.
Thought. So like, just a couple words here would do it. Her whole body felt jittery, like she was shivering. Every layer of her skin vibrated at a slightly different frequency. She couldn't her brain screaming, is this it? Are we done?
Yep.
Right? Like, but just giving me some kind of explanation as to why her body's doing this, because her vocalization and her body language are out of line. Right?
Yeah.
What she's presenting, are you sure it's not a Maryland ship? She's not that is a rejection of how her body is feeling. So you need the thought to explain to me.
Yeah. I got to get my emotions under control, or I'm going to fall apart here.
Or I'm going to fall apart here. I got to pull myself together.
Because then later on, when she does go into her little flow state, it's like, okay.
Yeah. And you can see how you'll get a really nice emotional transformation there. Like, her body was jittery. She felt like she was feeling every layer of her skin vibrated at a slightly different frequency. She knew she had to pull herself together. She couldn't show the crew, this kind of emotion. This isn't how a leader behaved, right? Are you sure it's not a Marlin ship? She said. And then later, when you come back and she's like, she didn't feel anything. She's in that flow state. You give me a moment of foreshadowing. In future battles, she'd remember this is the moment where she knew that she was a battlefield commander, right?
Yep.
Now you've got that like really strong emotional drive from page 1 to page 5.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else about the piece?
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a really great kind of climactic. How close are we to the end here?
Oh gosh, there are a couple of battles coming up that will top even this one.
Okay, that's what I figured. This feels like a midpoint battle.
Yep. Yeah.
Like I'm seeing some success, but I actually haven't faced the real challenge yet. Yeah. Yep. Well, great job with it. I'm going to hit stop on the recording and we can talk a little bit more.
All right.
Maybe.